right, we will go ahead and get started. I want to introduce you to, so you want to be on the race committee. I'm Mark Smith, I'm the new race director here at Harbor Island, and George Hines back there is my counterpart over at PPYC. So this is a kind of a joint effort. We are friends and not enemies. So as a matter of fact, I probably do just as much racing with my team over there as I do over here. So it's just great to have friends on both lakes and people that have boats on both lakes. That's even better. So I got into sailboat racing. That's Vanderbilt's race team. So they had a little open house today. So you'll see some young folks coming and going. I got into sailboat racing about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. I have been sailing since 1989 on and off. I did more fiberglass work. You guys had a fiberglass workshop yesterday over at the other club. I did more fiberglass repair for the first 20 years of my racing career than I did actually sailing boats. So my wife said I have a very bad attitude on the pickleball court, so she kicked me out of our league. I guess I hate to lose, apparently. And so I was like, oh, fine, I'm going to go race sailboats. I don't know why I said that, but I found PPYC over there and joined up with a group over there. So that was about 4 years ago. And as I wrote in my last little recap here, our little racing recap I do, I think for the first 4 years of racing sailboats, I figured I didn't know who was setting up the race or who was actually running the races. I just figured it was, you know, gremlins would come in and set up the course or ferries or something. I don't know. And then it dawned on me, it's like, oh, these people are not paid to run these races. They're volunteers. So that got me thinking about, all right, I love racing. It takes me 50 minutes to get from my house here. If I'm going to drive 50 minutes in traffic on a beautiful day, I want to be out racing. I don't want to be volunteering. However, if each of us take a turn doing these kinds of things, then we can all race and enjoy that together. So real quick, who is here from PPYC? Let me see your hands. All right, great. Thank you for coming over here. Is this first time here at Harbor Island? Anyone's first time to see the club? All right, good. Thank you for coming. And then, how many people here actually have raced sailboats? You're actively racing. All right, about half of us. All right. So my question, I have a couple of questions, and that is, you kind of heard why I'm here. But what made you think, or what made you guys want to come to understand how a sailboat race works and being a part of that? Anyone?
Well, we've been on the race committee once at PPYC.
Okay.
Didn't know what we were doing, but were instructed gently in what to do. And so we thought we'd come and find out what officially we should have been doing.
Wonderful.
And what we should be going forward with.
Excellent. That's good. I will tell you, there's some selfish reasons to be here, okay? The selfish reason to be here is if you are interested in sailing or potentially racing, sitting on a race committee boat, watching the race unfold right in front of you, especially the starts, those chaotic, crazy 5-minute or 3-minute starts. It's fun listening to some of the veterans that are running the race, listening to their commentary and dialogue about what's going on, who's screwing up, who caught the lift, who did this. And you sit with Ted on a boat and he's giving you all these things, but you can see from the committee boat, you can see the different wind shifts coming in clearly. And you're not in the heat of battle, and you're listening and you're watching. And so I have learned a lot about sailboat racing just by being on the committee boat watching. And another selfish thing, I did a mark boat, which is a chase boat or a rescue boat. Committee boat is on the starting line. Chase boat's doing other things on the race course, you'll find out today. But just being with one other person, and we got to know each other. We've turned out we're the same age. We have kids. We have a lot of common other interests. So we just sat and chatted, and I made a new friend. So it's a wonderful way to make new friends doing something that both people love to do. So it's a couple of reasons. So thank you for that. Anybody else? What made you decide to come today?
I race plenty often, and so I think it's my turn to help with committee boats.
Wonderful, I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel the same way. Excellent, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Okay, here's the next one then. Fears. What has you afraid of doing a race committee. Mine, I'll tell you what mine is, and maybe yours as well. So we have a big beast called Bob and Jack. It's our big race committee boat, and PPYC's boat even looks like a haunted something. To me, I walk past it to get to Wednesday night racing, and I'm like, that scares me. The boat itself scares me because I did not grow up motorboating, so I don't understand the first thing about a diesel engine. And so the whole that part of it terrifies me. It's like, huh?
That's gasoline outboard.
Oh, here's gasoline. Bob and Jack is, yeah.
So
So
there you go. There's the.
anyway, so that kind of terrifies me. I don't want to screw up and crash the boat trying to get the boat out of the slip. So don't ask me to do it. So that's my fear. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or fears?
I'm afraid of going racing and not having a race committee.
Okay, yeah. I'm also afraid of throwing the wrong flag or doing the wrong thing. I mean, I barely know English, folks. I mean, these flags, I mean, why, if you wanted to use the number 6, why just not put the number 6? Why does it have to be this black and white flag for a 6? I gotta learn a new language. So that kind of fills me with a little bit of fear. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Well, I wanted just this opening just to kind of be for you to think through and share some things, my vulnerabilities on why I haven't really done much signing up for sailboat committee, but I'm changing, as you said. It's my turn to start giving back. If we all give just a little bit, then we can, the rest of us, if you've got 13 or 14 races on a calendar for the year, if you volunteer for one of them and everyone takes a turn, everyone gets a race, everyone gets to enjoy. So. I am going to turn it over for the official training to Ted Chapin. I'm in Ted's shoes, and so he has very large shoes to fill because the guy knows racing, passionate about it. He's been doing it for a long time here at this club, and his trainings are excellent. So Ted, thank you so much for taking your time to do this today.
Glad to do it. Thanks a lot to Mark for taking over my responsibilities. This is something that I started doing for the club when I started to be the race committee around here. And honestly, as a racing sailor myself, if you want to have good activity out here, you got to participate in it. You need to have good people doing the race committee. And when folks get good racing, they realize, there's something to be benefited from by getting involved and helping out, and hopefully, create that culture where everybody spends a little bit of time on a race committee boat. The purpose of this course is to ensure club members who are interested in performing race committee tasks for all regattas at HIYC are well informed of the requirements outlined in the current quadrant of the Racing Rules of Sailing. Is everybody familiar with the Racing Rules of Sailing? It is the rule book. If you're a member of US Sailing, you can get a free copy that's on your phone in your US Sailing app. Just click that. I can get into any part of the rules by section. Part 3, conduct of a race. We're going to go over a lot of that. There's just a ton of appendices in this thing that have to do with specialized equipment. We'll talk for a minute about Appendix U, which is something we use with dinghies a lot, but to have all of this information available to you on your phone is great. So, kudos to US Sailing. So, a rule book, that's one of the tools you're going to need. Other things, you might need a whistle in case your signaling system goes down. You'll definitely need a stick and a string. And by that I mean a stick with a piece of magnetic tape or something like that, because you can tell the wind direction. That's how you're going to set your marks, right? We'll talk a lot about setting marks, but sometimes you want that wind to be perpendicular to your mark, or you want your wind to be pointed at the mark. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to those sections. There's all kinds of equipment that we use on the race committee boat. Most of the stuff that you'll need will be provided. We do have sticks and strings. We've got all kinds of flags. We have a ollie starting system that we use for dinghy racing that is an automated 3-minute process. And that's actually defined in Racing Rules of Sailing under Appendix U. We'll talk a little bit about Appendix U, but it used to be that you had to outline everything that you did that was different than the regular 5-minute sequence that's included in the rule book. Now that it's Appendix U, all you have to do is say in your sailing instructions, we're going to be using Appendix U. Excuse me. I got the hiccups. Okay. So, the race committee team members and responsibilities. That's the first part that we're going to get into right here. All right, so what does the race committee do? Race committee's got a number of responsibilities. First thing that we do is we follow the rules. Racing Rules of Sailing, Rule 5, the organizing authority, race committee, technical committee, protest committee, and other race officials shall be governed by the rules and the conduct and the judging of the event. That's Racing Rules of Sailing number 5. We need to publish SI that conform with Appendix J. Now, Appendix J and K are examples of how you put together a sailing instructions or a notice of race. All of our documents here are already put together, and we set them up basically for the quadrant that we're racing in. So our current quadrant is 2021 through 2024. So right now, our guys just have to go in and change the dates. Every time that quadrant changes, it's going to change the impact of some of the rules that you're using. So every 4 years, somebody has to go through and make all of those changes to your sailing instructions. For example, the dinghy races that we had that had all of those starting sequences for Appendix U wasn't necessary anymore, so we took it out. You want your sailing instructions and your notice of race to be concise. And the way that these appendixes show you to put them together is that sailors will run into these rules and things that you're outlining in the SI and the NOR as they encounter them. So as soon as they step on the lot, they need to know some things about times and registration and places to be. Then they need to know about race day and time and schedule of events and if there's a dinner afterwards or whatever. But you put together your notice of race and your sailing instructions. Avoid conflicts between the two. You don't want to repeat stuff, because if you wind up in a protest about the timing of an event around a race or something like that, and it says two different things in your NOR and SI, you don't want that. So try to keep things all in one place. The sailing instructions shall include those that will apply, and that's RRSJ 2.2. And there are 29 subsections of that rule. If you're going to write brand new SI from scratch, like we had to for a lightning districts, you want to go through and just make sure you're familiar with all those subsections. Most of us are working at clubs that already were running regattas that have been run, and all of our stuff is pretty much up to date. But if you have to create something from scratch, and fortunately the lightning class had great documentation about this is the way that our sailors like to sail, and this is a change that we make to the penalty rules when you're going downwind. So there's some things, if you're doing a particular class of racing, you may want to look into when you're publishing your SI and your notice of race. Publishing of written sailing instructions is required. Rule 90.2A. NOR and SI availability is RRS 25.1. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers out here. You may note to go back and take a look at some of these, but I'll tell you the basis of 25.1 is the notice of race shall be made available to each boat that enters the event before she enters. So when you open registration, you should have a notice of race available. You don't need to have your SI yet. The sailing instructions shall be made available to each boat before a race begins. So you can hold your SI right down to day of show. The HIYC RC chair will post an RI and provide an update to sailing instructions. When we assign principal race officers for our regattas, those people are responsible for, hey, take a look at your SI and your NOR. If there are any mistakes that, maybe Mark missed a date when he was updating something and we need to go back and change that. It's always good for the POR to be familiar with both of these documents anyway, because they're going to be the person to answer questions about them. The NOR and SI here, we post them electronically as PDFs. We used to print out 20 copies of 3 different free page documents, and we're just killing trees for no reason. So I have told people around here, hey, get on your phone. You can get the SI on the PDF and have it in your hand right now. Get on your computer when you get your email at home and print out a copy if you want, right? And if someone requests it, we are required to make it available. So if someone comes up to me and says, I want to print a copy of the SI, I'll go, okay, and I'll print it off the Bluetooth thing back over here, but I won't print 20 copies because there's no sense in killing trees for no good reason. Another thing that the RC is supposed to do is conduct races as directed by the OA, that's the organizing authority, and as required by the racing rules of sailing. So that means the race committee shall conduct all races as directed by the organizing authority as required by the rules. That's Mark. So at our club, however Mark says the process needs to go as far as putting the races together, that's the way that it needs to be done. Okay, scoring. Well, that's one of the big things we do, right? RRS 90.3A. The race committee shall score a race or series as provided in Appendix A, which is where you find the regular scoring procedure, unless the notice of race or sailing instructions specify some other system. A race shall be scored as if it is not abandoned, and if one boat starts, sails the course, and finishes within the race time limit, if any, even if she retires after finishing or is disqualified. So the rules for scoring a race are, if you run a race, a boat sails the race, starts the race, and finishes the race, you score the race. We'll talk a little bit more about abandoning a race in a bit. A race committee can abandon a race at any time, even after the race has already been sailed. And you know, we'll talk some more about that, but basically you want to consider who you affect adversely if you do something like that. Making changes to the sailing instructions. The sailing instructions may be changed provided the change is in writing and posted on the official notice board before the time stated in the sailing instructions on the water, or on the water communicated to each boat before her warning signal. Oral changes to the sailing instructions may be given only on the water and only if that procedure is outlined in your sailing instructions. So the racing rules of sailing will allow you to say, okay guys, we're going to change this from a 5-minute to a 3-minute ollie. And you can do that on the water if you tell everybody, and if you've said in your SI already that changes can be made orally to the sailing instructions on the water. So it's not always, it can be convenient to do that, but the one thing you want to make sure that you do if you do orally make changes to the sailing instructions on the water is that you notify every single boat. So generally folks don't include making oral changes in their sailing instructions, and you love that until you get out there and you're like, damn, if we could only tell them we want to race around a windward mark instead of a windward gate. So that's something important to know about making changes, but the SIs can change a racing rule only if permitted in RRS 86.1. A racing rule shall not be changed unless permitted in the rule itself or as follows. There are several rules noted in 86.1. We will not go into each, but I do recommend reading 86.1. And you know, one of the reasons why we produce new quadrants every 4 years is we discover things about the rules we're racing under, and there are often reasons. There's a book of appeals that you could look at on your sailing app right now that is what they're basing any changes to the rules in the next quadrant on. Protests that go on to committees, and it's like going to the Supreme Court, that might wind up changing the rules. If the SIs change a rule, they will refer specifically to that rule and state the change. That is RRS 85.1. A change to a rule shall refer specifically to the rule and state the change. A change to a rule includes an addition to it or a deletion of all or part of it. In our sailing instructions, there is a section, and actually it's also repeated in the NOR, and that's for the purpose of being repetitive. There is a paragraph at the top that says, we're racing under the racing rules of sailing and the following rules have been changed, and or if there's a particular appendix, if we're using Appendix U, or anything specific to point out. But if there are rules that are changed, they're in that paragraph. And in the section where that rule is changed, as you read on, it describes the change that's been made to the rule. Our online notice board is not a bad place in ClubSpot to post changes. I do want folks to use online scoring and to use as much of the online system as they can. When people register online, we can send them text messages, we can send them emails. There's a lot about the working part of the procedure. You don't have to enter into a data sheet everybody's name and boat type and PHRF, because hopefully they've already done it. And then all you got to do is go into the scoring system and do the scoring, which really is no harder than doing it on an Excel sheet. You just have to go from tab to tab and check little boxes to make it do what you want it to do. Anybody that wants a look at the ClubSpot account, I'll actually show it to you, but we'll do that after this class is over. That's a little Harbor Island specific, and I can understand why you Percy Priest guys, as much as you would love to come volunteer over here, it's probably not something that you're going to use unless you get ClubSpot, in which case, good luck. They are great, but one of the best things that we get, they do, it's a great benefit for financial management for the club, but we're basically getting this awesome racing system for free that scores by Portsmouth or PHRF, or you can basically put any kind of race or series together in there, and it is really nice. Okay, so on with what else the race committee does. Appointing a protest committee, which is something people that volunteer often overlook. Because you don't expect that you're going to have a protest. And in the best case scenario, you're not going to have a protest. Everything's going to go perfectly. There won't be any mistakes by the race committee or the competitors, and there's no protests. And very often that is what happens. But if you're not prepared to put together a committee, you're going to wind up scraping the parking lot for people who have some knowledge that would be applicable and will also be impartial. You can't go collecting crew from other people's boats who have a stake in the outcome of the race to be on the committee. So it's a good idea to have a couple of aces in your pocket that you can call at the last minute and go, hey man, can you come down? We got a protest. So appointing a protest committee. The organizing authority can also appoint a protest committee. With most small races though, no one is prepared to do that. I would be prepared to pull some friends together if you can. So why are protest committees valuable? Everybody makes mistakes. One can reasonably expect that they will make the same mistakes if not allowed the opportunity to learn what they did. So protest committees can be good. People can recognize what are mistakes based on the rules and hopefully get the opportunity not to do it again. So protest committees are learning opportunities for everyone, including the race committee. The race committee may learn something about what they did had an impact on what happened. Why protest committees suck. They can suck. There can be hard feelings involved. It's not appropriate to offer an opinion in a competitor case as the race committee or as someone who might be on the protest committee before protest filing time is over. But I'm often compelled to suggest a competitor consider whether the consequences are worth the effort and give them an ear to their case and not take away the learning opportunity, right? But as a race committee person responsible for promoting or building a protest committee, it's not appropriate to comment on things with competitors until after protest filing time is over. But you can retain the educational benefit by saying, okay, let's talk about it. Let's see what happened. Okay, and safety. It's the end of the list, but it's the top of your responsibilities, race committee, not just for competitors, but also for the race committee. We do a lot of winter racing out here. I'd say most of our really things on our calendar, we've got 8 weeks of racing in dinghies and in cruisers out here in the winter. And the cruiser series is unmonitored, so every other boat is kind of responsible for helping people out there if things get out of hand. We make sure it's understood by competitors that, RRS number 4, you choose whether or not you're going to go out there and race, and we hope everything goes well for you, but it's at your own risk. We get a lot of races in the winter. We do a lot of organized regattas, and with organized regattas, you have a little bit better opportunity to build a good crew. And we'll start talking about what the different roles are on the race committee. Then this is in your book. as well. You can follow along with the JRTC or JTRCT if you've got a copy of it. So the roles, the principal race officer, the PRO. The PRO is the chief executive of the race committee team. They communicate with Mark about how the process is going and how the planning is going. The PRO is responsible for organizing the race committee. There are other volunteers that are designated to our events that would be responsible for helping with registration. If you have a regatta that has a meal or some other activity associated with it, a social hour, then it's good to have people that are able to help you with those things. Maybe they're not available during the day, but they can show up at 4 o'clock and put out the drinks for everybody when they get back in. So that's a little bit of depth that is in the race committee team. And as a PRO or someone working on the committee, you might want to volunteer to say, hey, I can help, or find somebody, or that is the PRO though organizes all of the racing activities. They are in charge of all of that, and they're generally going to be on Bob and Jack on our boat, on the big boat. The timer, and before I get into every one of these things, we don't ever have 9 people on Bob and Jack. We could never fit that many people on Bob and Jack. So a lot of these responsibilities are combined. If you're doing a really large regatta that requires a lot of input or a lot of help, I've used my big boat, Heaven, as our race committee boat on here, so we could get 5 or 6 people on there comfortably and do all kinds of different responsibilities. So for every race on the weekend, you're not going to be able to get that many people to come and help you. And you look at flag boat and mark boat operator, that's 4 people, 2 people per boat, because you need an operator and you need a hand on each one of those boats. So that's a lot of people just for a weekend race. So what we wind up doing is combining a lot of these responsibilities amongst a group of 2 or 3 people that's going to make things happen. We do a lot of dinghy racing with a 2-person RC and maybe a flag boat that can go move marks for us. So a lot of these things can be combined, but to describe them as specific sole responsibilities to the person helps to outline the importance of every one of these little responsibilities. Okay, so the timer calls the time sequences aloud so the start and finish can be properly executed. So if you're doing a 5-minute sequence, they've got a clock or more than 1 clock, and they are watching that clock to give people, it's 10 seconds until prep flag up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and everybody knows to raise the flag. Or the signaler. The signaler is the person who signals information to competitors through visual signals from the flag boat. So the only thing the signaler is doing is raising and lowering the signal flags that we use to talk to competitors. We'll talk about a bunch of flags here in just a minute. The sounder. The sounder is in charge of sound signals that draw competitors' attention to visual signals. Now, when you're racing under Rule 26, which is the regular 5-minute sequence, visual signals rule. That means if there's a conflict between an audible and a visual signal rules. The Appendix U is an all-audible system that requires no flags. And so you can use flags with it, but you have to say what you're going to do. And we do that a lot with dinghy racing because you still have individual recalls and general recalls when you're sailing the dinghies. So you got to have a flag for an individual and a general recall at the very least, even if you're running the thing with ollie. So I'll put in all of my dinghy stuff. We're using ollie, and we're going to be using these 2 flags, X-ray and first substitute. That's individual and general recall. Okay, so the line sighter. The line sighter sights the start line for OCS, tracks boats returning to start, and sights the finish line. Okay, so OCS is on the core side. If any part of a boat's hull is on the course side of the course before the starting signal, they are OCS, and they have to restart. That is one of the more complicated things that you have to deal with in a large competitive fleet with race committee than anything else, because everybody is gunning for a great start. So much of the race depends on being in a good position on the start, and anything that you didn't get at the start, you got to make up for. So everybody is gunning for boat end. Sometimes we'll actually move the pin 5 degrees towards the wind to create a favor at the pin end of the line. So if you've got, 30 lightnings out here racing the blue nose and everybody's on the boat end, if you give some favor to the pin end, it'll spread your fleet out down the line and you won't have so much compression. Something to consider. Okay, so the line sighter is sighting for OCS. The PRO is probably looking for these boats too. And if you have a pin boat, your pin boat is going to help you out with the boats that are all the way at the other end of the line. As you think about when you're looking across a line of boats that are perfectly lined up, 45 degrees off the wind, you're going to be able to see one sail number. So while you're watching the start develop, you and your line sighter are watching these boats that are, those guys are getting close. He's above this guy and he's going to take him over, I know. So you're getting numbers in your head. You might even write them down and figure out who's going to do it. And then your pin boat is going to get those boats that are being obscured by OCS boats over here that only he can see the sail numbers on. And there is a great, actually my friend Paul White from Indianapolis, who's a regional race officer, was here this morning and he gave me an awesome tip about some communication so that your pin boat operator can, you get to start off and the first thing that they say back to you is 6-2. That means I got 6 boats over and I got 2 of their numbers. And if you've got about 6 boats over and you only have 4 numbers, you hope the 2 numbers that he hollers out are the 2 that you're missing. And then you go ahead and call individual recall for those boats and you announce it as you say that you will in the sailing instructions. Because a general recall defrauds all of the other people that started well of their good start. So I try to lean towards an individual recall if at all possible. That's a big thing. I'm getting a little bit off track and I'm sure I'll talk some more about that later, but general recall deprives people who made good starts of a good start. And generally the reason you're going to do a general recall instead of an individual is if you don't get all of the numbers of the sails that were over. If you got 6 boats that were over and you only have 4 numbers, it sucks, but you got to go ahead and do a general because who are the other 2? Question?
Yes. Are you required as a race committee officer or being on the race committee to call out the sail numbers that are over?
You're not. You're not. You're actually in the rules. It says you don't have to hail. If you choose to hail, you must tell them. So you'll see in our sailing instructions, it says that the race committee will attempt to hail your numbers. Actually, I think I changed attempt to, we'll hail your numbers. But if you don't hear them, that's not our problem. It does not create a conflict of the rules. If we hail your numbers the way that we say we're going to, and you don't hear it, it's too bad. And we will hail numbers, or we'll hail usually like casual weekend racing. Or, hey, Tim, you're over. And Tim will come back and do whatever. If you do an individual recall and there's 6 boats that are over, that X-ray flag has to stay in the air until all 6 of those boats have completely crossed the starting line, every part of their boat back across the starting line and restarted. So if you got 6 that went over and only 5 that came back, that X-ray stays up for 4 minutes and then you take it down. That means somebody goes, maybe we were over now. I really don't know. And they're all the way up at the windward mark and they look back and that X-ray is still flying. They might go, oh shit, now we've done it, right? So you leave the flag up for 4 minutes. And the reason why the 4 minutes, that lets you take it down 1 minute before you start a warning signal on another race if you're doing like back-to-back 5-minute finishes. Interesting to know. For the longest time, I didn't know that. But I'm never over early. Okay, so the recorder. The recorder identifies and records all boats starting and finishing, including competitors who do not compete in the race. And that is one thing that when we got large fleets, I'd love to have more people on the boat. And when Paul would come down here, he'd bring 2 ladies with him usually. And Linda would be our recorder. And we just count on her to do our job. We go out there and she'd write down every sail number that was out there and have little notes next to it and everything. It's great. So the person who's the recorder can also often be the scorer. They tabulate the points and finishing times and calculate handicaps if required. Our online scoring system calculates handicaps automatically. Use that online scoring system. It's great. Let's see. So wind reader, and that's usually the PRO is the guy that's taking wind readings and getting the direction, getting the velocity, making sure that you've got a sailable course. If you've got big shifts out there and you're reading them on the compass of the boat, then you know you probably need to make some changes to the course. We'll talk some more about that when we talk about course changes. So wind reader observes and records wind direction, velocity at regular intervals. And the other thing that can kind of let you see too, if you, Paul has a sheet where he'll write all of these directions and velocities down, and we can go back in the middle of a race and he goes, it's really trending left. We might want to go ahead and think about next race doing this. So it's great halfway through the race before the next race when you're going to make a change to already be talking about that, to be thinking about that, and being cognizant about what's going on with the conditions around you is important. Flag boat operator. Okay, flag boat operator is the person who's driving Bob and Jack. So if you yourself are not certified or qualified or capable, get someone who is able to drive Bob and Jack. There are instructions on how to start the boat. It's a gas engine. It's a Ford 351 Windsor. And currently it's not operating, but I'm sure they're going to get that fixed up before the spring season gets started. But there are instructions on a laminated card that are hanging off of the side. It's always good that it's gas engine, marine version of your Ford Windsor. And so prime it. Throw the gas forward 3 times before cranking it up and it will start. It's a great boat. Mark set boat operator sets and relocates marks, relays changes in winds to the RC. Communication is very important. Having someone who can anticipate what will be needed of them is valuable. They will radio the RC with wind at the weather mark, see a change in conditions, and is prepared with the C flag, which their mark change. Your mark set boat is going to have a C flag. They're going to have an M flag. They're going to have an S flag. We'll talk some more about those changes. But having someone who has some experience is good on the mark set boat operator, because if you shorten the course at the windward mark, they're going to have to take finishes in between the S flag and that mark. If they make a change that requires posting of the Charlie flag, there's also a little course board that you can hold up that shows if that mark has been moved further away, is closer to, or if it's gone left or right. And you can also put the compass heading on there, but we use that mostly in dinghy racing. Not all of the dinghies are allowed to have compasses on the boat, so we don't put a compass heading up. And we're racing on a big horseshoe-shaped lake, which you can see the yellow map of over there. When we change a course on a lake that's shaped like a horseshoe, giving somebody coordinates to it doesn't really help. So there's that. It's good to have you. I would say one of my best mark set boat operators was in the crowd. I think Mandy was back there a minute ago. Julie, one of my great RC crew, Frostbite series, long time helper outer on the big boat. Safety boat operator. Competitor and committee safety is an important consideration. Some events require safety boats. Frostbite, V15 when we did the nationals here, Blue Nose for lightnings. You got large fleets of big boats. You need more personnel for safety. There's nothing more important. We're working on having some more. We actually do have more support boats available. This is last year's text. Sorry about that. We've got 3 boats now. We've got 2 whalers and we've got the 26-foot Mackinac for the big RC boat. And we're going to put a deck on the back of that so that you can actually recover people from the water with the big boat, which would be great. The best safety boats have some particular characteristics. The new whaler that we got has a lot of these. Low freeboard, floor near or below the water line. When you're recovering people from the water, it's nice to have no rails on the side. So that boat's our good recover people from the water boat. It's not heavy enough to do some other things though. So the big whaler is the one that we would use to help uncapsize a Lightning. It's got a little bit more horsepower and a little bit more weight to the boat. Safety boat operators should be very good drivers who are familiar with best practices. It's not a bad idea to have taken the Tennessee Boating Safety course because you know some very simple things that I can tell you right now that make complete sense. You're never going to approach someone in the water with the motor. You're always going to have the motor behind you and you're facing them. Think about the direction of the wind if you're taking somebody out of the water and approaching in a marked safety boat. You want to make sure that it's not going to be blowing you down on them. You may be in a position where that's the only thing you can do, and the only thing you do to keep from getting blown down on them is working that reverse a little bit. So just, you know, when you approach someone to take them out of the water, you kill the engine. You don't want to leave any possibility that you're going to hurt somebody inadvertently. And you may think, oh, this is only going to take a second, and then, oh, something happens. And my instructor for the U.S. sailing class for level 1 instructor was telling a story when she was coaching, and her coaching assistant was out there, and they had the boat running, and they had their kill switch on and everything, and they went back to help a boat right itself, and another boat turned over and hit the gas, and the boat took off, and it cut a guy that was in the water, and he had to go to an emergency room, and if they hadn't been as close to a hospital as they were, that would have been a much more serious situation. But you never assume that everything is going to happen like you want it to. So use that kill switch, kill the engine, and when you're taking somebody out of the water, it's not worth the risk. You might hurt somebody when you're trying to help them. So some of these responsibilities can be combined, like I was saying, and some of these get taken up, like when we use Ollie, we don't really need a timer because we press start at 3 minutes and it does everything for us. Distribute your talent accordingly. Marked boat and safety boat are going to need crew. Your best buddy may want to be on the big boat with you, but a good mark set boat is a valuable asset. You may want your buddy on the mark set boat because they can read the wind or they understand why an offset mark needs to be more than 6 boat lengths away from the windward mark, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. So, conduct of a race. This is part 3 in the racing rules of sailing. There's a lot that we'll go into for setting up the conduct of a race. Let's see, I never hit the start button on my thing. I don't know exactly how long we've been going. 44 minutes, we've been going for a minute. So how about we take a 10-minute break to stretch our legs, grab some snacks or something, and then we'll come back and start with conduct of a race. All right? Sounds good. It's 1:44, so we'll go for 1:54. All right. All right, if everybody wants to get back to their seats, we'll get started with the conduct of a race. Sir, good to see you, man. Randall, good to see you.
Like if you're Tim and you're over.
If you're Tim, you're over. I saw you back there. I'm like, come on. Yep. You know, these whalers, they aren't really good for turning the lightnings over. You know, if I have an example, I might have to do that later. Yeah, it's because I started another round of chemo on Wednesday night, and it was recommended me by the pharmacy to try doing it overnight because during the day you just feel like shit all day. So we'll try doing it overnight. Take your nausea and take the chemo at night. Like, okay, as long as I don't die in my own bed, I'll do it. Yeah, so that starts Thursday, and then once every 4 weeks I'll go through 5 days of chemo, and every 2 months I get an MRI, and right now I don't have any tumors, and hopefully that stays that way. So seeing a guy at Vanderbilt too, I mean, it's going to come back at some point somehow, and that's when Plan B comes in. So, and who knows when that's going to be? It could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be a year and a half. Hopefully longer than not. But I'm talking with a guy at Vanderbilt too, so I've got access to more second chance treatments. They did a DC Vax trial here, which is basically they take antibodies from me and my tumor, and they create an antibody for me that will go attack the tumor. And it's extended people's lives up to 5 years, which is more than anything else that's out there right now. It says we'll do 8 weeks. And, you know, Yeah, well, they had success. Third round of trials in Rhode Island had success, and they're supposed to be going for treatment. And that was in the national news like 2 weeks ago. And Vanderbilt had a DC Vax thing, but I'm not eligible for it because they don't have the right kind of sample of my original tumor. They got slides and stuff, but they don't have the real stuff. And a buddy of mine is in my fraternity in college, works for a company called Nico Neuro that makes the thing that hopefully they'll use to get the sample of my next tumor that makes it believe it's still in my brain. And so it maintains a perfect genetic code and everything, and they send it through a round of 14 different treatments to see what works well, and then hopefully we'll have a sample that they can give
We'll
to the
keep in
DC
touch
Vax
before
people to
then.
make their vaccine. So fingers crossed. Yeah, so now I just go to treatment until the tumor comes back. Good to see y'all too. All right. Okay. So you fellas back in the kitchen. I don't want you to miss out on any of the good stuff. We'll talk about conduct of a race now, right? Section 3 in your racing rules of sailing. It's pretty, this is what we do. We do the race. So, race area selection. What is the wind direction? That's the first thing that you're going to be looking at. When I'm running a race, I'll get up in the morning. I'll be watching the weather during the week so I can kind of see what the trend is for the day of weather. If the rain's going to come through in the morning and we'll be fine racing in the afternoon or vice versa. And I'll look at what the wind's supposed to be doing. And if it looks like there's a persistent right-hand shift or a persistent left-hand shift, I'm prepared, or I will set my courses being prepared to know I may need to shift to the right to accommodate a shift or a left. Okay, so wind direction, that's the number one thing that's going to tell you what direction you're going to be racing, because all of our races start into the wind. What courses will you be using? Okay, when we're using the big yellow map over here, you can see some pink markers that are on there that we use. They're navigational markers on the river for the cruisers. We have some descriptions of, there's a 20-mile race that is a do-it-on-your-own race here, where you go around a series of those marks and you get your times, and the person with the best times at the end of the year wins. How much room will you need? You consider overall race time, the number of fleets, target time per fleet, and you try and keep your racing within a reasonable amount of time. If it's a district championship or something, we'll be out there till 4:30 or something before we come back in. If it's just a weekend race, we're probably out there till about 3. Let's see, how much depth do you need? If you're running a buoy course, our anchor lines are a little over 20 feet long. Obviously, we can't set buoys for one design racing in the channel, because it's way deeper than that. So the topographic map that is part of, that actually came from Garmin's app. It's like 16 different little maps that were sewn together for the big yellow map on the wall over there. But knowing where those areas are that you can lay a mark and still have boats be able to round it are important. We've got a place out in front of the club that has been called Brock's Rock, although he's not the only person that's hit it. He probably hit it the hardest and the fastest. And knowing where those things are important too. You don't want to set a finish line with Brock's Rock just out to the right, so anybody that misses the finish winds up running aground. What are the geographic features? Something we have to consider a lot on a horseshoe-shaped lake, particularly if it's dinghy racing and we're trying to do windward-leeward courses. If the wind is blowing off of the shore somewhere, you don't want to set the mark all the way in there by the shore, because then you're in the shadow of the land. You actually want to be about 100 feet at least out from the shore. And in some of these areas, there's some rising hills over here to the southeast. Big hill that comes down, so the wind does funny things when it hits the water down there. You don't want to be too close to geographic features when the wind is blowing over them, whenever possible. So keep your marks 100 feet off the shore if you're going into the wind near a shore. Is there commercial traffic? We have commercial traffic regularly on Old Hickory, and so there's no area we can go to completely avoid it. What I'll do before a race starts on a weekend is I'll call the lock and dam. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. Hit Google Maps, Old Hickory Dam, and the guy's name's Gunny. And hey, Gunny, it's Ted up at Harbor Island. We're racing today. You got any boats coming through? And he'll give me the whole schedule for the day, and I'll know, okay, he's got one in there right now. 4 hours from now, it's going to be heading upriver, and it takes about an hour to get from there to here. So, you know, I got 5 hours of clear time before I'm going to have to deal with the boat. It's good to know where the big boats are. There are other apps that work for periodic periods of time, but if Ingram, for example, decides that they aren't going to put this information in some particular site that app relies on for information, we lose that information. So I have used several different find a boat apps out there, and all of them work for a few weeks and then they don't. The easiest way to find out where barges are here is just call the dam, they'll tell you. And they'll tell the barges when they come through too, which is really nice, and I know the barge guys appreciate it. Sometimes we'll have days where we won't have barges coming up and we have the wind coming out of the southeast, and I'll actually put a mark in the Chutes Branch area and race guys across the channel. I would only do that if I knew for a fact that there were no barges coming up, because otherwise we've got all kinds of stuff going on. You see a barge coming up, holy crap, you got to cancel and get everybody out of the channel. So I would only set a course across the channel if I knew we weren't going to have any traffic like that. All right. So course selections for cruisers, wind speed and directions, what you'll use to choose your course for river racing around nav marks. You may want to start the course into the wind and try to get a good balance of windward, leeward sailing in the course if you can. You will often get a chance to talk to skippers during the week or before racing. It's okay to get an idea of what everyone expects to do. I got great communication from the B fleet, and I knew most of the guys in the A fleet in cruising, so I knew what they were going to be up to for a weekend. It's always good to be informed of what racers expect, and by the time you get to race day, everybody's on the same page. For dinghies, it's good to discuss in advance with sailors or class officers preferred time, distance, variety of courses for buoy racing. Some classes prefer a mix of courses or have restrictions in their class rules that tell you how you can run your day, like Y flyers, you have to break after 3 races for lunch or something like that. So there are class rules that will affect the way that you'll have to run your day, and that's not one that I like very much. If you're out there waiting all morning for wind and you finally get some wind, but oh crap, it's 12 o'clock, we got to go in so everybody can eat lunch. It's terrible. But it happens. So these are examples of some of the windward leeward courses that we do. You see courses A, B, and M are all using gate at the top. That's the windward mark, and then you have the gate mark off to the side. We do a lot of racing on course M and a little bit on course B because it allows your start-finish boat to stay in basically the same position. And then if you have a wind shift, you just shift around it, but your start boat is still going to maintain the same position. And that's good, particularly for things like dinghy racing, because you don't, every time you got to haul up the anchor on that boat and move all the marks around and stuff like that, every time you got to go up to the other end of the course just to start a race, you got to get them to come all the way back down to the bottom of the course to start again. So I like to use courses B and M. If you think about it, you're doing short courses and you want to march yourself up the lake, you can do a course A and then start your next race from up there and just leapfrog on up the course. It's a good idea to finish people at the end of the day heading back to the clubhouse if you can. So if you've got if you're doing course M and the clubhouse is back down this way, you might shorten the course and finish them when they're coming back down this way, so they don't have to go all the way to the other end of the lake and then come back home. So just something nice to think about last race of the day. Give everybody an easy ride home. You can only do what is permitted in the sailing instructions. So no matter what kind of course you put them on, it has to be in the sailing instructions. So I'll often, in my sailing instructions, have these listed as courses as well. And these are the same courses essentially with a gate instead of a mark at the bottom. Gates are good for a number of different reasons. One design fleets, gates are good if you got 10, 11 boats. Large fleets, gates allow people a little bit more decision on which side of the course they're going to take to get home. And it avoids the traffic jam at a leeward mark situation. You know, your fleet gets spread out between the two marks instead of cramming them all around one mark at the bottom. This course MX over to the right that I put on there, you'll notice that there is a finish that is off the starboard side of the boat. That is very useful in multi-class dinghy regattas. If you've got 3 different classes of dinghies that are out there racing, and one thing you can do, which I've done pretty well with Paul White when he's come down to help me run the McDougal, is we got a good idea of how long these boats race against each other, what the relative speed is. So we can usually set it up to where we're not still taking finishes while we're getting races started. But that is the reason why you have course MX over there. So you can have a fleet in the start zone, which is listed as closed during the race, so that if you've got fleets that are finishing, they can go ahead and finish off the starboard side of the boat while you're still starting a race off of the port side of the boat. That is specifically for multi-fleet regattas where you're trying to get 3 races in on a Saturday and you got 4 fleets. That's 12 races you got to get. It's a lot of racing. So those are some examples of the marks that we do for that situation. That's my favorite.
On course A there, is the RC boat actually moving?
Yes, the RC boat will reposition to take a finish to windward. And there's a lot of reasons why people like windward finishes. It's a little bit more competitive. There a little bit more strategy involved versus downwind racing, because downwind racing in most classes is a drag race, because we all have spinnakers and we can go DDW and it's the fastest way to get to the line. It's going to be a drag race. Melgises or other boats that have asymmetricals may not feel the same way. But sometimes, in favor of getting more racing, it's a better situation to have a windward finish. That's why I like the M course, because you can have a windward finish. Now, I still get some complaints about that because people say, well, you have a half a windward leg on the start and a half a windward leg on the finish. Settle for it, you get. It's either that or you're going to finish downwind. So those are courses that all 6 of those, the previous 6 I showed you, and then these are all on one page of our sailing instructions. Okay, so setting marks is the next thing to talk about. Got to determine the wind direction. There's your stick and your string, the best tool on the boat. You can use the stick and the string for perspective from where your boat is. Very often, although not 100% of the time, your boat's going to be at anchor pointed into mostly the wind. So we have a stick that's tall enough to get it above the roof on Bob and Jack and get a really good read on the wind so you know where your wind direction is coming from. The windward mark direction location should be directly into the wind. Your marked boat should have a stick and string too. So when they're up there about to drop the thing in the water, they can put up their stick and a string, and that string should be pointed back at the race committee boat. Setting a gate or an offset. There are good reasons for including offset marks in gates. Lightnings love offset marks on the windward leg so they have a chance to get their spinnaker ready for the downwind leg. They can put the pole out and be ready to hoist by the time you get to the offset. Consider the time it takes to reset a course when you use these marks. So you don't want to use them all the time because offsets have to be more than 6 boat lengths from the windward mark, because you need 2 3 boat length circles around each one of those marks in relation to room. So really what you're looking for is the gate and the offset are going to be 7 boat lengths apart, so that you have independent 3 boat length circles from each one of those, for each one of those marks for room. So sailors know how to interpret the room. Great mark boat operators can be hard to come by. Consider the conditions and the volume of other responsibilities you may have asked them to cover. If they're also supposed to be responsible for safety, as well as setting, an offset for a windward mark. Try not to give them more work than they can handle. And if it's a choice between having an offset mark and not having an offset mark, most times you can do without it. But it is nice for spreading out the fleet around that windward mark. When you're setting a mark, make sure your anchors are set. What do you do if an anchor mark floats away? If you've got another mark, you replace it and go collect that other mark as quickly as you can. What if you don't have another mark? What do you use? Anybody know? Code flag M. That's a big blue field with a white X on it. And there is the missing mark flag is something that you more often, that's a flag that you want on your safety boat. So he's going to have an S flag, a C flag, a missing mark flag, so that if a mark is floated down Old Hickory, they can go drop anchor and hold up the M flag, and competitors know, racing rules of sailing, M flag means I am the missing mark. So boats will round that boat instead. You never know you need one until you need one.
What was the color of the flag again?
It's blue with a white X on it. Yeah.
But that has to be on Mark boat, that shouldn't be on RC.
It should be on the mark boat, that's right. Mark boat's gonna do missing mark, change, and shorten course. And they'll need a change board as well, one of the little Charlie boards on there. And a lot of this stuff we didn't have around here. We didn't have a Mike flag, we didn't have Charlie boards. There are things that had been updated about these rules over time that folks just took for granted. You know, why we didn't do those things, so we just didn't keep up with them. But we've got all the equipment now.
Hey, Ted,
Yes.
just a question, can you go back to the offset mark being 3 boat lengths, being total 6 boat lengths from the windward mark?
Yes.
What's the theory behind that?
Well, the idea is it needs to be more than 6 so that each has its own independent 3 boat length circle. So you can sail out of the circle for the windward mark and into the circle for the offset. If you don't want an overlap of those 2 circles where when you round the windward mark, you've effectively given yourself room at the offset.
You've extended your rights to not have anybody go inside you.
Correct. Correct. And they only have, 1 boat length, maybe boat length and a half to get in there if they got in there, but it's unlikely that that's going to happen unless you have a problem on your boat and they're able to get in there. But in that circle, they would have the opportunity to do that.
So you're breaking the one circle and you're entering into new circle
Yes.
with new opportunities for others.
Yes. And as far as relating the rules to a situation too, it's helpful to a protest committee to know that those are 2 independent and separate zones. So 7.5 boat lengths is a good estimation between offset. Same thing for a gate at the bottom of a course. You want each one of those gate markers to have its own 3 boat length circle. So you want to be 7.5, maybe 8 boat lengths apart if you can. We're usually more like 7.5 out here because we're racing in a narrow area of the lake or something.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Ted?
Can I ask a question about the gate?
Yes.
Do you normally put them right up from upwind from the starting line, or do you move them side to side, or is that just race committee option? Or?
Okay, so the gate needs to be dead downwind from the windward mark. And those 2 marks need to likewise be 7.5 boat lengths apart. And you use the windward mark because it is the windward, you don't use the windward in the offset. The first place you go out there is the windward mark. So the gate will be dead downwind, just like if you were dropping a marker, it will be dead downwind. So you think about that boat length and a half dead zone, that is dead downwind from the windward mark, and your markers are on either side. And each one of those markers that is the gate needs to be perpendicular to the wind direction. You don't want one gate end to be favored over the other. So you need them both to be perpendicular to the wind direction. Yes?
Guidance on the angle for the offset mark?
I'm sorry?
What's the guidance on the angle for the offset mark? I've been in a number of races where the offset mark turns out to be another windward mark. And they-
Yes.
Instead of offsetting it, they set it further than windward.
You're absolutely right.
I still gotta make this mark.
You're absolutely right. So when you set your offset, you want to be perpendicular to your windward mark. If you set it too far upwind, or even if it's perpendicular, a left-hand shift will make your offset mark a bit of a fetch. It might be hard to get without tacking to get it.
Yeah, I've seen more often than not, it seems like it's more of a little bit of a reach as opposed to a straight, or a broad reach instead of a beam reach, but I didn't know if there was an explicit guidance on that.
There is, just like I was saying before, you could set the pin on a starting line 5 degrees to windward to draw people down the line. It's sort of the same thing, a bit of a judgment call. If it's, the conditions in your racing area better than anybody else. If you're in some wind that's going to stay pretty steady and you feel pretty good about it, go for perpendicular. If you feel like you're getting a little bit of left hand in there that would make it hard to reach the offset mark, then give it a little bit of downwind. And I think that really it just goes for racing area to racing areas. If we're racing up and down the lake and I know I've got steady wind blowing across that mark all the time, I'll do them pretty doggone square if I can.
Will you be covering when you're still allowed to change the location of the mark during the race?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so let's see. I'll make sure I'm on the right slide here. Yes, okay. All right, so starting line options. When you're setting up the starting line, generally what we do around here is an RC signal boat and a mark. That's what most people do anywhere. We also do the RC signal boat and a pin or a mark with the pin boat also down there. So the pin boat has the opportunity to be mobile while they're sighting the pin back up the line. So if we got big races or big regattas, it's nice to have a pin boat down there, particularly one design dinghies because we have more of them, and the more chance that you're gonna miss some action. The 2 marks, using just 2 marks as a line. I've done that when I'm the only guy on RC and I'm running races out there for dinghies, so that I can also be a rescue boat if I need to be. It's also good for practice. You set up 2 marks that are square and a windward and a leeward, and you get people to run races, and then you can motor down next to them and coach them and tell them what to do. The midline buoy. A midline buoy is something that we almost never use here because our racing area is so narrow. But if you go to other racing, and a lot of us do travel to St. Pete to go to nudes or something like that, you may see a line that has a midline buoy. That midline buoy is supposed to be square with the boat and your pin end. And what that's supposed to help prevent is line sag. And you'll see it over a really long starting line that the boats that are close to the boat or close to the pin will be a little bit closer. And then in the middle of the line, there's this deep sag because nobody knows where the middle of the line is. Those middle line buoys are not marks of the course. So if you're racing with a starting line that's got a midline buoy, you can run right over that sucker. No problem. It's not a mark of the course. So midline buoys is basically when you have an extended starting line, you want to show people where it is. Okay. So setting the starting line, the single most important task on the water, because you all know the single most important task before the water was writing your SI. The rule of thumb for the length of the starting line is 1 to 1.5 aggregate lengths of boats in the start. So you got 10, 14-foot boats, your starting line should be about 140 feet long. We've had 10, 14-foot lasers out here to sail, and our starting line has not been 140 feet long. You can get away with shorter, but generally the rule is 1 to 1.5 aggregate lengths of boats in the start. Absent any other factors, square is fair. Like I said before, you may want to create pin or boat in favor for any number of reasons, but in the absence of those factors, making the line as square to the wind as possible is what you want to do. And that's between the flag of reckoning on the race committee boat and the mark. Bob and Jack out here waggles around a whole lot, so we usually set Bob and Jack and put the flag up, and then we set the pin based on the activity of Bob and Jack. Let's see, other factors affecting the starting line. If the boat end is popular, regardless of your perfectly fair square line, you may want to favor the pin to spread the boats out. If the wind is heavy or boats are fast, you may want the longer line because they're going to be coming in hot and you're racing, so everybody's going to be squeezed in tight together. Be aware that a very short or very long line will exacerbate any lack of squareness. So if you're unsquare and you're short, it's obvious the unsquareness of your line. Same with an overly long line. Okay. Yes, sir.
You gonna talk about the thing you guys do where you stream a mark from the committee boat?
You know, it's not in this, but I will mention, it says in our sailing instructions that at any time during the starting sequence that our race committee boat can trail a marker behind our boat. And we basically have a floating mark that has 2 8-foot pieces of PVC pipe that are wrapped in red tape so that there's some visibility there. You can see where the lines are, and it holds the mark off the stern of the boat. So if you've got a bunch of hot racers coming in, you extend the length of the committee boat. If they hit that mark, they're hitting your boat. So it keeps a lot of people off the back of the boat. And those PVC poles to hold it in position back there, absolutely helpful, because otherwise, you know, the thing's just kind of out there on its own going around. With the PVC pipes, we tie them off to the two back cleats, and that mark stays where it's supposed to stay all day long. It's great. And that's where we mount our course board on the back too. We'll get to talking about course boards, but that's something that you want to be prepared for as well. Okay, so starting systems. I wish that I had bought an iStart for our club when we could have. The pandemic killed them. That is no lie. These companies in China that were making the tiny parts said, we won't sell them to you unless you're going to buy 10,000. There will never be 10,000 iStarts in the US. So the guys just went out of business. It's a shame, but they had a automated starting system that did 46 different sequences, and you could have them repeat a sequence, and you know, all this crazy stuff. Is great. It's great. Wish that we still had an iStart. Wish we could get one. But now, if we do a 5-minute sequence, we're doing it manually, and we're doing it as described by RRS-26. This is the default system, starting system in Racing Rules of Sailing. If you intend to use this 5-minute system, you need not enunciate the sequence in the NOR. The exception would be if you were using something like the iStart system that had other noises that it made. You might mention that. So with the regular 5-minute start, at 5 minutes you get one sound and your class flag goes up. At 4 minutes you get one sound and the prep signal goes up. So that can be the P, the prep flag, the I, the Z, the U, or the black flag, and those are penalty flags. We'll talk more about penalty flags later. At 1 minute before the start, you do one long horn and remove the prep flag. And then at 0, you remove the class flag with the horn to start the race. So that's your regular 5-minute starting signal. All of the flags are on Bob and Jack. The class flags are on the left side of the little pass through to the front. Most of the other flags are on the post that's on the right side of the boat. All the flag poles are in the back on a rack. That's how we store them. Keeps them off the floor. Keeps people from slipping and falling on them. So at the end of the day, take your flags off, put them back on the posts. It's just little rope and toggle things that you attach the flags with. And actually, I think right now down there we have the prep flag, the AP flag. Some of the flags that we use pretty commonly are permanently mounted with zip ties, so you don't have to take those off. The ones that we use all the time are on posts, but you might have to change your class flag. You might have to pull out another one of these flags we'll talk about here in a minute too.
Hey Ted,
Yes?
do you guys normally use a warning signal? We typically will give three horns and take, postpone down a minute before we're gonna enter the sequence. Is that just a...
We don't have anything in particular that we do there, and the only flag that has a time sensitive factor is when you take down first substitute at the end of a general recall. When you remove first substitute, which you can do whenever you want, that is 1 minute before your next starting sequence starts. So before you remove first substitute at the end of general recall, make sure you're ready to start your sequence, because you've got 1 minute to do so, and 1 minute from when that thing comes down. So your timer needs to be, okay, 1 minute, ready to go. Yeah, but pulling down AP or something, those, you know, a horn accompanies that. If there is anything particular that you do to give people a warning, it's a good idea to include it in your SI. If it's not part of the RRS 26 or another appendix for a start, then it's good to mention that in there. Okay, so for, you know, I mentioned Appendix U3 to you guys. Appendix U3, that's our ollie. He's right in here. I can go fire him up if you want me to. It's very loud. The starting sequence shall consist of the following sound signals made at the indicated times. These signals shall be timed from their commencement and shall govern even if visual signals are used. That's why I don't use class flags and prep flags and stuff. Unless people absolutely beg me to, you could do class at 3, prep at 2, prep down at 1, and class it down at 0, but why? 3-minute sequences go fast. The only things that I use flag-wise when I'm using ollie out there are the X-ray and the first substitute for general recall. So, and this, like I mentioned before, this is now a part of the racing rules of sailing. So, note for Appendix U, audible signals rule. Flags are not required but may be used. If you plan to do so, you must say you're going to do so in the SI. Any race signal may be made by hailing, in which case the corresponding visual signal may be used, but not its designated sounds. A series of short sounds will be used to call attention to a hail or a visual signal. Individual recalls shall be signaled by hailing the sail numbers or other distinguishing feature. It says flag X need not be displayed. We'll talk more about flag X and why I like to use it. But if you plan to do so, you must say what you're going to do in the SI. And with the casual weekend racing down here with dinghies, I'll tell everybody I'm going to use X-ray just like I would in a regular race, which we'll talk some more about that. Okay, so before your race gets started, there's a lot that the RC does to get prepared to get the race going. So 30 to 10 minutes before warning, that's a long time frame. I'm not sure I was supposed to, let's say 10 minutes before the warning. Review your procedures for flags, line sighting, OCS, the things that you're going to do. Talk to your pin boat if you want him to come back with that 6.2, 10.476 and whatnot to give you OCS numbers from the other end of the boat. So talk about those procedures. 5 minutes prior to the warning, the timer takes control. The timer is the only person that should be talking. Have your flags ready. There will be more conversation, but minimize it. The course must be designated prior to your warning signal. So if you have a course board on the boat, you have to have the course on the board before firing off the warning signal. So 5 minutes to the start, that's the warning signal. Monitor your wind and weather. Starting marks must be set before the prep. So at your 5 minute, if your starting pin is not in place, you've got 1 minute left. You've got to have that pin set before the prep at 4 minutes. 4 minutes prior to the signal is the prep. Boats begin racing. So it's the prep signal that starts racing. The rules apply when the prep signal has been sounded. The rules don't apply between the 5 and the 4 minute. Outside of the way boats conduct themselves at sea otherwise, rules apply when the prep signal begins racing. So RRS 3145 and all of the rules in Part 2 are in effect. Let's see, so 3 minutes to the start. Oh, I think I had animations there that I didn't click. I'm sorry about that. The class flag goes up at 5 and the prep flag goes up at 4. Okay, so 3 minutes prior to the start, review recall procedures. Say, okay, this fleet's looking a little hot. This is what we're going to do if we do this. Hey, don't forget, in the last race, we didn't do this. Go over some of those things. Make sure the signaler can hear the line sighter. The PRO is the person who is going to make the decision if you're going to do an individual or a general recall. And that decision has to come pretty quick. You don't want to wait 30 seconds to make it. You got to make the decision when the starting signal is sounded. So you're reviewing those procedures, make sure your signal can hear the line sighter. You're monitoring wind and weather. It's something you're doing all the time. The boats are starting to line up. You can see down your line and see if from your flag to your pin, if your course is, if the line is square. Just being in touch with it. There's nothing that goes on at 3 minutes as far as flags. That's kind of time to gather your stuff and make sure you're on top of it. So 2 minutes prior to the start, and this was something recommended to me by Paul White as well, and if you have a big race, it's not a bad idea. You've got a voice recorder on your phone, turn it on. Because you're gonna get conversations that are happening on the boat that are indicating these are the boats that we're looking at that might be OCS. You may miss a number, you may get something wrong, you may have to go back and listen to that tape, you may have to take that tape to a protest hearing. So it's not a bad idea. 1 minute prior to the start, the preparatory flag goes down. Any starting penalties also go into effect. So we're going to talk about those penalties in a minute, but this is 1 minute prior to the start, and many of those penalties rely on boats staying out of certain areas around the starting line at this 1 minute mark. You describe the details of what's going on for your voice recording. Your line sider people are making notes about the potential OCS boats. Because, you know, if it looks like 3 boats have got a good shot of being over, I would already have their numbers on a piece of scratch paper before it happens. All right, so you're documenting those boats. I find myself in my notes. Okay, at the start, the class flag comes down. You immediately decide if an individual recall is appropriate. You never hail all clear. Never hail all clear. It's not a requirement of the race committee, and it can more often be confused than anything else. Just don't do it. If somebody's OCS and they have to come back to cross the line, it is in the rules that the race committee is not to tell them when they're clear. That's what the X-ray flag is for, and that's why it can be confusing, because if there's more than one boat has been called over, if you're the only boat that's been called over, you can watch the X-ray flag, and when it comes down, you know you're fine. But if there's 5 boats that are over and 4 of them have come back to cross the line and the other one's sailing to the windward mark, that flag will stay up for 4 minutes. It is the sailor's responsibility, is the competitor's responsibility to determine that they brought every piece of their boat across the starting line before they start again. And it's the line sider's job to go, okay, they're clear, they're good. Or, oh, they dipped the line, but they didn't cross it. They're going to get scored DSC because they didn't sail the course. So that is, do not hail all clear. Whether it is when they're coming back to recross the line or it's just the start. It actually, I know it feels good because I've done it myself. All clear, great job. You guys go race really fast. You just don't want to do it. Don't say all clear. And if you take the U.S. Sailing RO course, they will hammer that into you. Okay, so deciding about the individual recall. Let's talk about that. RRS 29.1 is the individual recall rule when a boat starting signal, when at a boat starting signal, any part of her hull is on the course side. Hull does not include a bowsprit. It doesn't include a extra sail. It doesn't include a crew member's butt if they're hiking out really hard. If any part of her hull is on the course side of the starting line, they must comply with Rule 30.1. The race committee will promptly display flag X with 1 sound. The flag shall be displayed until the hull of each such boat has been completely on the pre-start side of the starting line or one of its extensions, and until all such boats have complied with Rule 30.1 if it applies, but no later than 4 minutes after the starting signal or 1 minute before any later starting signal, whichever is earlier. If Rules 29.2, 30.3, or 30.4 applies, this rule does not. Those 29.2, 30.3, and 30.4 are penalty rules. We'll talk some more about those. So, code flag X up with 1 sound. There it is. I think I had to click it twice.
I have a question on the last part.
Yes.
If a boat goes over the line before the race starts, do they have to fully cross the line and come back around?
If a boat, it depends on, we'll talk some more about penalties, but if you're just out there under the P flag, you can sail all over the place as long as you're on the starting side of the line at the start of the race. But some of the penalties that are applied, if you are across the line or its extensions, and the extensions mean the starting line goes around the world. If they're across the line outside the pin, you're across the line, depending upon the penalty flag that's being used. We'll get to penalty flags in a second. Those are lots of fun. And you're not going to see a lot of penalty flags in local racing unless it's like the Galen Freeman or, the Alive Hospice over here. We might have a penalty flag or something. You go to districts or nationals and any class of boat, you're going to see all of those flags once. At some point, you'll get to see those flags for sure.
They do that after multiple boats are across. They get tired, the race committee gets tired of it, and they'll throw up the penalty flag, and then, you're on thin ice, brother.
And it could be just solely based on the opinion of the race committee that the fleet looks particularly aggressive. That you may make that decision for any kind of reason. Maybe, You know, boats half of the fleet was way the hell over the line. Well, put the reins on them and give them a penalty. We had, for the V15 Nationals, they came out with the brand new U flag, and nobody even knew what it meant. That was exciting, and it was we'll talk about it, but I'm pretty sure it's a DSQ, maybe, if you're over. Anyway. So individual recalls are important to score as soon as possible. So if any part of her hull, code flag X comes up with one sound, each boat has to be completely on the start side before you drop code flag X. Hail boats only if specified in the SI, and we generally will, if it's not directly specified in the SI, I'll definitely say at the skipper's meeting, I'm going to call you guys by name, or I'm going to call you guys by your sail numbers. If it's a weekend race and I know everybody in their boat, I'll just call them by name. Let's see. Tell competitors how you will hail them. I'll call you by name. I'll call you by your boat. I'll maybe call you by your hull number. But you'd be surprised how many people have hull numbers and don't know what they are. If you're borrowing a boat, you may not know the hull number. You keep track of all OCS boats and make note if they properly restart, because anybody who doesn't properly restart, then they get scored, did not sail the course. And you're not to tell them that they are clear. Okay, so after an individual recall, what do you do after an individual recall? Not a whole lot, right? You're assuming everyone has exonerated themselves, your race is running, you review your procedures, you make sure you recorded everything properly and get about your business, paying attention to the conditions and looking out for the safety of everybody that's out there. There are some situations that require special considerations. Pursuit races may have boats starting while OCS boats are returning to start. OCS boats have broken a rule. They have no rights. So when OCS boats are returning to start in a situation like that, they have to stay out of everybody's way. Rolling starts may have an X flag for the previous start displayed down to 1 minute before the next fleet starts. So if you're rolling one start after another and you've got an OCS individual recall boat that hasn't come back, that flag will be flying up until 1 minute before the next start. If you do rolling pursuit starts, it's worth mentioning the possibility that these things might happen at the skipper's meeting. Do your best to individual recall when possible, because competitors who get started well are penalized by general recalls, and if you can identify the OCS boats, recall them individually. So general recall is when the starting sailor race committee is unable to identify all the boats that are on the course side of the starting line, or there's been an error in the starting procedure. I talked about this with Paul this afternoon, just out on the sidewalk. If you accidentally double tap a horn, something goes wrong in the procedure, go ahead and throw up the general recall, start your sequence over. No use in anybody being out there having a reason that they were confused and have to consult for redress or something like that because they didn't understand what you did when they probably did understand. You just mistakenly double tapped the horn. Just throw a general recall if you're in sequence, if the race has already started. If something before a race has started and you need to reset, postpone, throw it to postpone. But if you're in sequence, use the general recall. If there's been an error in the starting sequence, it's a great way to get restarted. But remember, when you take it down, you got 1 minute to start your next sequence. Yeah, the warning signal for a new start for the recall class shall be made 1 minute after the first substitute is removed, and starts for the succeeding classes that follow shall follow the new start.
Ted, on page 36 of our booklet, the general recall, they're calling it first substitute as well?
Yes, first substitute is the actual name for the flag.
That's the name of the flag. I know that, but then it's general recall in the notes, so why don't they just call it general recall?
Well, first substitute has other nautical uses.
What's that?
It has other nautical uses. The whole alphabet has different things that are used for navigation and stuff. These flags we also use for racing, right? Yeah, like code flag Lima has two meanings we'll talk about, but it has a third completely different meaning for navigation.
I knew what it meant. I was asking for a friend.
Okay. Okay, so with general recalls, like I said, prefer an individual if it's possible. First substitute goes up with 2 sounds. It comes down with 1. The warning signal is 1 minute after first substitute comes down. Check your line. Was it square? Is the fleet too aggressive? is this where we go into penalty? Are people getting too jumpy and we need to slow them down a little bit? And so now we'll start talking about penalties. Let's see, let me make sure I didn't leave anything out of your general recall. Okay, no, I think we're good to go into starting penalties. So, starting penalties. This is Racing Rule 30.1. If I flag has been displayed and any part of a boat's hull is on the course side of the starting line or one of its extensions, that is the boat going through, the line going through the boat and the pin around the world, during the last minute before her starting signal, she shall sail across an extension so that her hull is completely on the pre-start side before she starts. Now, you have to be familiar with what this is saying because it's telling you the boat has to sail across an extension. So that means the outside. You can't dip the line under an I flag. If you're OCS here, you got to go around an extension. Oops, sorry, we're going this way. If you're OCS here, you got to go on around an extension to restart. You can't just dip the line and restart. All right, so let's see. Flag I, yes, okay, so the extensions, and we talked about the extensions, and now flag Z. If flag Z has been displayed, no part of a boat's hull should be in the triangle formed by the ends of the starting line and the first mark during the last minute before a starting signal. If a boat breaks this rule and is identified, she shall receive without a hearing a 20% scoring penalty, as calculated and stated in Rule 44.3C. She shall be penalized even if the race is restarted or resailed. This is where the penalties get kind of confusing too, because if a race is restarted or resailed, a boat may or may not be penalized under this rule. In this case, she shall be penalized even if the race is restarted or resailed, but not if it is postponed or abandoned before the starting signal. Postponed or abandoned after the signal, it doesn't count. If she is similarly identified during a subsequent attempt to start the same race, she shall receive an additional 20% scoring penalty. So if you have been hit with the Z flag once and then you go inside the triangle, which I'll show you the triangle, again, you're going to have a 40% scoring penalty on you. So Z flag is pretty serious stuff. Now we'll talk about the U flag. The U flag that surprised us all at the V15 Regional Nationals. This is a new flag as of the 2021-24 racing quadrant. If flag U has been displayed, no part of a boat's hull shall be in the triangle formed by the ends of the starting line and the first mark during the last minute before a starting signal. And if a boat breaks this rule and she is identified, she shall be disqualified without a hearing, but not if the race is restarted or resailed. So if the sequence gets restarted and the race gets resailed, the U flag penalty is not going to apply to the person who makes this mistake. But that's a big disqualified without a hearing from that race. That sucks. That's a whole race that comes out of your, and you may be in a situation in a regatta where that can't be excluded from your score. So U flag is new, and it's still not the worst flag. The black flag is the worst, the harshest flag. If a black flag has been displayed, and this is as the prep flag in your starting sequence, black flag has been displayed, no part of a boat's hull shall be in the triangle formed by the ends of the starting line of the first mark during the last minute before a starting signal. And if a boat breaks this rule and is identified, she shall be disqualified without a hearing, even if the race is restarted or resailed, but not if it's postponed or abandoned before the starting signal. If a general recall is signaled or the race is abandoned after the starting signal, the race committee shall display her sail number before the next warning signal for that race. And if the race is restarted or resailed, she shall not sail in it. If she does so, her disqualification shall not be excluded in calculating her series score. So those are the penalty flags. And the black flag among the worst of them. Okay, so what are we doing during the race while those guys are out there rolling around? We're keeping track of the fleets. We're keeping track of weather. We want to make sure that no adverse weather conditions jump in on us and make things dangerous. If the wind is light, we may have to adjust some course lengths. is the course a good course? Do you need to make changes to the course for other reasons? Shortening or abandoning the course. So out here, oscillations on Old Hickory are pretty common. But you know when a real shift settles in that you may actually have to change the course. And when you change the course, we use code flag Charlie. Our RRS 33, while boats are racing, the race committee may change leg of the course that begins at a rounding mark or at a gate by changing the position of the next mark or the finish line and signaling all boats before they begin the leg that the next mark, but the next mark need not be in position at that time. So if you're about to change the course, you need to tell them what you're doing, where the course is being changed, RRS 33A. If the direction of the leg will be changed, the signal shall display flag C with repetitive sounds, one or both. The new compass heading, which we don't do, but we do the green triangle and the plus or minus for the distances, particularly with dinghies. If you don't have a course board at Priest, hey, maybe get one. I think I spent $11 and went into the shop and made some magnet things and everything worked out great. Or if not, it is handy with dinghies though, just to give people, oh, look left, look right. It's closer, it's further away. And it's in the rules, it's what we're supposed to be doing. This is, part of what we're doing is preparing our people to do this other places. So we want them to be familiar with this stuff. Okay, so, yes, sir. Sure.
Just to clarify, so your mark boat's putting up Charlie, and they would also put up the green triangle.
That is correct.
Because after the next mark, right?
Correct.
In that situation, I think they did it wrong before Huron, they did it beforehand, but there's no limitation on how far you have to go. They ran out of wind and they were trying to shorten the course, and they put Charlie up with the intention, they actually had us go all the way up the course the next time, but they only had to have us go just around the fluid mark and back up far enough to stop the race, which is what they wanted to do, but they didn't realize that, I think.
Yeah, now,
Or we didn't understand it.
and there's a situation there, if you want to shorten the course, we'll use code flag S, which we'll be talking about next. And so then boats will finish in between a pin and the S flag on your mark boat. And so your S flag doesn't need to be flying your mark boat doesn't need to be flying anything but S, but they can throw out a pin on the course in an area of the course that boats would sail through anyway. So if you wanted to shorten the course halfway up a windward leg, as long as you were in an area that the boats would have to sail through anyway, throw out a pin, throw out an anchor, fly S, shorten the course and finish there. That is our next thing to talk about. Okay, so before we go to that though, let's talk about a few issues with changing the course. Sometimes you want to consider using a different colored buoy as the change mark so you can make it recognizably different and easy to see. I've seen some classes ask people to do that. We didn't do that because our different colored markers are inflatable and we don't have a portable vacuum cleaner to fill them up out there. So having a whaler running around out there with a yellow thing on the front of their boat all day would be a distraction. So we didn't do that, but sometimes it is helpful to use a different colored mark to do the change. Compass headings, like I mentioned before, aren't terribly useful on our horseshoe-shaped courses or for dinghy sailors that don't have compasses on their boat. Let's see, consider including in the SI a range of change or degree or distance in which you won't do a change flag. And I've done that when I've had Paul helping me out on the One Design stuff, because if it's literally we're bumping it a boat length to the left to overcome a persistent left-hand shift, then we don't have to put up a change flag. We just go bump the mark a boat length to the left and we keep everybody racing. You don't want to give people more information than they need because it was only going to give you an opportunity to confuse folks. So, and it's good if you're going to do that, you include it in your sailing instructions, but you say things like, if the change is less than 3 degrees, we will not use a Charlie flag. And that's particularly handy with just casual local racing where you guys are like, hey, give me a break. I'm not going to go out there and throw a C flag. Yeah, okay, so now we're going to talk about shortening or abandoning a course. Shortening or abandoning during the race, RS 32.1. After the starting signal, the race committee may shorten the course, display flag S with 2 sounds, or abandon the race, displaying flag N over H or N over A with 3 sounds. We'll look at some pictures of those in a minute. Because of foul weather, because of insufficient wind, making it unlikely that any boat will finish within the time limit, because a mark is missing or out of position, or any other reason directly affecting the safety or fairness of the competition. So you can shorten or abandon a race for any reason as long as it's, to benefit, you're benefiting the racers. Let's see. I apologize. I'm going back and I've covered my slides just to make sure I'm reading everything that I thought I was going to read. RS 32.1. In addition, the race committee may shorten the course so that other scheduled races can be sailed or abandon the race. However, after one boat has started, sailed the course, and finished within the race time limit, if any, and it's sometimes good to have a time limit in there in your sailing instructions, the race committee shall not abandon the race without considering the consequences for all boats in the race or series. So if you got 10 boats out there and there's one guy that finished in the time limit and the wind shut off and everybody else floated backwards, the only person that's really going to piss off is that one guy that finished. But to be honest, to abandon that race would be fair to the other 9 people who went out there and got stuck on the water. So make consideration of those things before abandoning a race. Because you can do it off the water. You can run that race and have people out there still waiting to finish and come back in later and go, that's terribly unfair. I'm going to abandon that race. You have the ability to do that anytime the race committee can abandon a race. Okay, so sailing the race. Racing rules of sailing 28.1. A boat shall start, sail the course, and then finish. While doing so, she may leave on either side a mark that does not begin, bound, or end the leg she is sailing. And after finishing, she need not cross the finishing line completely. You can still hit a mark after you've finished your boat. If you dip the line and then accidentally hit the mark, you still hit that mark and you've got to refinish. And your second finish is the one that's going to count. But if you're finishing the race, you can actually dip the line and then head back to the club or something, and your whole boat doesn't have to cross as long as a piece of your hull does. But don't hit the mark and don't hit the boat, because then you'll have to do it all over again. Okay, a boat may correct any errors in sailing the course provided she has not crossed the finishing line to finish. So if there was a windward mark with an offset and you're finishing downwind and you realize right before you cross the finish line that you didn't round the offset, that boat can go all the way back up there and round the offset and come back and finish. It's not saying everybody would do that, but they could. You can only correct errors before you have finished, though. RS 31, while racing, a boat shall not touch a starting mark before starting, a mark that begins, bounds, or ends the leg of a course on which she is sailing, or a finishing mark after finishing. I just mentioned that, so you know what we're doing there. Missing or out of position marks. If a mark is missing or out of position while boats are racing, the race committee shall, if possible, replace it in its correct position or substitute a new one of similar appearance, or substitute an object displaying flag M and make repetitive sound signals. So that's flag M. And you would literally just sit there and go, burp, 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 make some sounds until all the boats have properly recognized that you're in the marked around. U.S. Sailing prescribes that if a finishing mark is missing, but one other remains in place, and you can't do this with every race, and unfortunately you can't really do it very well with a time-corrected race, but U.S. Sailing prescribes that if a finishing mark is missing, but another one remains in place, the finishing line is aligned through the remaining mark at a 90-degree angle to the last leg and of the shortest practicable length. So a boat should go right next to the mark, and if a boat finishes, she should have her first reasonable opportunity to report to the race committee her finishing time and her position in relation to any nearby boats. Now, I put this in there to me because it's funny. Our whole racing series in the winter is self-monitored, and everybody has to report their finishes. And for the first 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, Nobody remembers to text Mark when they finish. Nobody. So we got to go put together races for the first couple of weeks, and people get used to it after a while. But you know, if there was no race committee, there's just a mark out there, which is the situation we have. U.S. Sailing prescribes that the sailors should contact the race committee and tell them when they finished. So do that on our Winter Series course, please. Okay, so finishing boats. Finish line length. Finish line length should be square to the wind. 7 to 10 boats length is a rule of thumb, but it can be shorter than the starting line if you want it to be. Shorter line can make it easier to score. You know, not all boats are going to be on the finishing line at the same time as you have when at the starting line. Consider the fleet. If they are prone to finish in a pack, maybe you do need a longer finish line and you give them the room to do so, but most of the time you're going to have boat, pause, boat. So your line doesn't need to be as long as your starting line. If you have multiple fleets sharing a finish line, err on the side of the fleets that err on the side of the largest fleet. Hello, William.
Hello, Ted.
That's
PowerPoint, I see.
my inspiration.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, well, we're getting close to the end, so you've missed most of it. You've seen this before.
So
right?
everybody, this is William Hofmeister. He actually invented sailing.
Yes.
No, I'll be happy to do Q&A if you want to.
Oh, sure.
You know, that way we can find out how effective you're teaching.
Well, we'll see.
Questions. They don't have the answers.
I don't know, this is not sounding as good as it did to begin with. Okay, so when you're preparing to finish boats, it's much like when you're starting a race. You want to limit conversation, have your scorer and your line sighter prepared and watching boats as they approach the line to identify them. If it's a big race with lots of boats, you may want to use multiple recording devices. You know, if nothing else, if you've got boats finishing in a pack, to have video that you can go back to or audio to go back to, it is useful. You never know when you'll need to refer back to it. U.S. sailing rules state that you finish between the pin and a blue flag. This has been a peeve of mine because a lot of the old fellas who don't read the new rules don't realize the blue flag doesn't mean on station anymore. The blue flag is your finish line flag. Now, it did used to be the on station flag. You would fly the blue flags, race committees on station. Our RC flag that we fly is just as good as saying we're on station and this is what we're here doing. But the blue flag, what U.S. Sailing was trying to do was remove clutter from the sky. The more flags that you're flying, the more confusing it can be. The blue flag is your line flag for a finish. Okay, unless this is specifically changed in your sailing instructions, you should use the blue flag on the finishing line. All right, so, yes, I forgot I had emphasis on the blue flag part. Okay, so we've got 7 more slides. It's 3 o'clock. Do you guys want to bust it out? Finish this thing up? I'm missing a page. Okay, let's keep it going. I may have to improvise a little bit because it looks like I'm missing a page, but that's okay. All right, so penalties, protests, and scoring. This is not slide 40. Okay, so scoring rules. 90.3A, the race committee shall score a race or series as provided in Appendix A unless the notice of race or sailing instructions specify some other system. A race shall not be scored if it's not abandoned, and if one boat starts, sails the course, and finishes within the time limit, if any, even if she retires after finishing or is disqualified. Okay, so one thing to point out about that, it's good to have a time limit in your races because if nothing else, you've got a time that you know that the whole thing is over. Or a finish time after the first boat. Every boat has to finish within an hour of the first boat. That works well with some of our multiple dinghy class regattas. Everybody's got to finish within 20 minutes of the first boat. If you don't finish within 20 minutes, you get scored, I don't know, DNF. But you'll put that in the sailing instructions so that people know. And then you don't wind up, you got 10 great boats and 2 marginal boats, and the 2 marginal boats are taking twice as long to sail the course. That's unfortunate, but if you have a time limit, then you can avoid some of those problems. Scoring rules, 90.3C, when the race committee determines from its own records or observation that it has scored a boat incorrectly, it shall correct the error and make the corrected scores available to competitors. That is a flag in the cap of our online scoring system, because if everybody has already gone home and it's the Saturday of a Saturday-Sunday regatta, you can change the scores online and then text everybody or email the group and say, scoring error has been corrected online. You can find corrected scores here. 90.3D, the race committee shall implement scoring changes directed by the protest committee or national authority as a result of decisions made in accordance with the rules. So maybe there's a protest committee on Saturday and everybody leaves the property knowing things are going to change with so-and-so and so-and-so because they've got a hearing going on. Then you can publish the new scores, the corrected scores, and let everybody know what's going on there. Series scoring. Each boat's series score shall be subject to Rule 90.3B, be the total of her race scores excluding her worst score. However, the notice of race or sailing instructions may make different arrangements by providing, for example, that no score will be excluded, that 2 or more scores will be excluded, or that a specified number of scores will be excluded if a specified number of races are completed. A race is completed if scored. If a boat has 2 or more equal or worst scores, the score for the races sailed earliest in the series shall be excluded. The boat with the lowest series scores wins, and others shall be ranked accordingly. So we've got a Frostbite series we run in the winter out here, and there were 40-something races this year, I think. 44. What's that, 44? Yeah, and so the way that we do that, not everybody can be out here every Sunday for 8 weeks in the winter. So we score 60% of the races. We handicap 40% of your scores get thrown out. Now, the way to win that series is to come every weekend. So only your very best worst scores get thrown out. But there have been folks who have missed a weekend here or there and still been in the running at the end of it because they got to throw out all the races that they missed. And we put that in our sailing instructions for that series. 40% of the races are going to get thrown out here. So it's good to know when you're doing series scoring. And, if it's like some people say in a weekend regatta, you got to get 5 races in to drop a race. And that's pretty common in cruising, cruising races. And 5 races is a pretty good goal. If you get 4 in, you're going to get judged on 4 races. You get 5 in, you get to drop 1. Okay, series tie breaking. If there is a series score tie between 2 or more boats, each boat's race scores shall be listed in order of best to worst. And at the first points where there is a difference, the tie shall be broken in favor of the boat with the best scores. No scores shall be excluded. This is Appendix A, which is the scoring section of the Racing Rules of Sailing. Unless you enunciate a different way that you're going to break ties, that's the way you break them. And it's weird because not everybody does it that way, but that's the way you break a tie in the Racing Rules of Sailing, unless you say something different in your sailing instructions. RRS 8.2 has some further guidance if a tie remains between 2 or more boats. But if you want to change the way that you break a tie, you change it in the SI. So letter scores, you saw our lovely letter scores up there. The scoring abbreviations, those are in RRS A10. And all the definitions are in there. We don't need to review each one of the letter scores, but you should know A10 is where you find them. You can't use abbreviations that are not in there unless you've put them in your sailing instructions. So like I think there are some things that have been added in this quadrant that didn't exist before, like RAF and some different stuff. But A10 in your Racing Rules of Sailing is where you find the things that you use. DSQ wasn't a term until they added it. Interesting. So A10, good thing to look at. Appendix 9 has guidance on redress. A6.2 has guidance on scoring after giving redress. Those are good issues to get into. Nobody ever wants to consider a situation where they have to offer redress, but hey, if you make a mistake and you owe somebody redress, that is a good place to look at how you should do that, how you can do that. Protest room wisdom, and this I get largely from my buddy Paul. Be organized. Your recordings and your documentation will help you. Be polite. Even if the competitor is protesting you, everyone deserves respect. This community is small enough that your reputation can precede you. Make sure it's a good one. You know, Paul being an example. Everybody knows where Paul has gone and run and done races, and they generally know his character, and he's a good quality guy. Okay, so be concise. Offering more details than you're asked for can be problematic. So if you're asked a specific question, answer that question. Don't add anything in there that isn't specific to that question or necessary to answer that question. Own your mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, even the race committee. And you know, I had to own a mistake at the Vanguard 15 Nationals. And the mistake I was owning wasn't obvious when I did it, but there was confusion about the marks out there, and the first 4 boats rounded the mark to starboard. And I'm like, what the hell are they? Oh shit, there was a pin that was still in there, and they thought it was a gate. Well, it was 2 different size things, and we had talked about it, and crap. When it comes right down to it, I had to abandon the race right then and start over again, because the first 4 boats rounded going the wrong way. What am I going to disqualify the first 4 boats that rounded the mark? I can't do that. That was my problem. I owned my mistakes, restarted the race. Regardless of outcomes, give competitors encouragement. This sport can be intimidating when you get started doing it. When you get started and do well, you know, you still have a bit of a fragile ego. Everybody's learning more. I mean, shoot, I thought I was a great sailor when I was 10. I'm 51. And there are people out there younger and older than me that can kick my butt all over the place. And it could be the conditions for the day or what, you know, maybe a boat that I'm not familiar with mastering, like most of the boats out there. But, you know, there's all competitors deserve encouragement and respect. We all love the sport, and the more that we can all do to keep it going, the better. So these are just a couple of things that I wanted to throw out there for consideration. Those are the cancellation flag over A and over H. Same thing with the postponement flag over A or H. If you fly those flags over A, that means we are canceling or abandoning or postponing, and there will be no more racing today. The flags over H mean go back in and there will be further instructions on shore. That's convenient to know. Not a lot of people use the A flag and H flag. If you fly the A flag from the committee boat at the end of the day, that means no more racing today. So when people are finishing the last race in a day of multiple races, A flag means there will be no more racing today. You don't even have to tell them. They can all head into the harbor. Code flag Lima. Interesting, it's the one on the top that's yellow and black. When you fly that on the committee boat, it means come within hail. I want all the competitors to come within hail of my boat. I got something I got to tell you. If you fly it on shore while the committee boat is at dock, it means a notice to competitors has been posted. So that can actually be useful on those Saturday mornings where the wind isn't going to come in until 12 o'clock, and so everybody's postponed on shore. Let's say you're flying a flag with that number 2 icon under it. That means we are postponed for 2 hours. You can use the number of flags with the AP flag to let people know predetermined times. And when you have traveling fleets, they really appreciate that because they know, oh, it's 2 hours until the start. We got time to go to the Quick Mart and get some beer. Or, you know, that's usually the thing, right? Do we have time to go to the Quick Mart and get some beer? Yeah, so if you provide them with some information like that, it can be helpful. I think the one in the middle, which is my horrible version of a Victor flag, the red X on a white background, good to know if you're ever sailing anywhere else. We do have one. We've never had to use it, but that means there's a competitor missing. And the race committee is asking all boats to monitor the safety channel. This is obviously only good if you're racing with boats that have radios. But if you ever see that flag and you're out on a big boat race, that means somebody's overboard and you got to keep an eye out for them. And code flag Yankee at the bottom there, that is our wear your PDFs, or PFDs, or your PDFs. Wear your personal flotation devices. If you see the race committee flying code flag Yankee, that means you're supposed to be wearing your life jacket. The books that you have there have descriptions on the back of a lot of the signals. You know, a lot of clubs our size don't have the number flags. We actually have the first 3. I don't think I've ever postponed longer than 3 hours. Those Join the Race Committee team books are great. They will give you some scenarios of a start and calling a finish. There is, what I've taught you today is a consolidation of a 10-hour course that US Sailing offers online. I highly recommend it if this is something you're going to do a lot for your club. I think the online courses were exhausted, but I'd love for Mark to go take the course. And I made part of our policy here, if you're the race committee chair, you get to take that course and the club will pay for it. If it's the online course, but we're not going to fly you to Annapolis. All right. I hope everybody got a lot out of that. If does anybody have any questions in general, or otherwise you can ask weird questions after we're done?
All right. Hey, on behalf of Harbor Island and Percy Priest, thank you, Ted.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that. So, and also on behalf of George and myself, thank you for being here. This is really encouraging to me, seeing so many people who want to be involved in sailboat racing. So, a couple of quick things. A lot of information today. No one expects you to go and be the PRO for some race in the near future. So my concept, and I'm sure George would say the same thing, we're hoping that we can have you volunteer and get under a mentor for the next couple races. Our races are posted on the board over there. The very next race is actually a dinghy race here a week from today. So gun goes off at 1 o'clock here. So if you want to come and see what it looks like, please let us know. James Odell is actually going to be the PRO for that race. Following Sunday, Paul Latour is going to be the PRO for that dinghy race. So there are a number of opportunities for you. I encourage you to sign up and get out there and just watch and see the action on board. What you can do right away, if you want to, Mandy Hoffmeister back there is willing to, and we can open up a couple of the committee boats, and you can go on Bob and Jack and actually, you know, look at what those flags look like and get the feel for what our committee boat looks like. And George, you'll probably do something similar on your boat over there, the haunted boat. What is the name of that boat?
The Lewis Launch?
The Lewis Launch. All right. So the Lewis Launch over there will be the same thing. But you know, the key takeaway for me is just get out there and volunteer with someone who knows what they're doing and watch it happen. That would be my main encouragement for you. So George will be reaching out to you, PPYC folks. I'll be reaching out to Harbor Island folks and try to get you paired up with a mentor. Any questions, anything that any of us can answer for you right now? Who does want to take advantage and go with Mandy and take a look at the committee boat? Anybody? Couple? Okay. Yeah. Other than that, that's all the programming we had. There's still plenty of...
Did you want anybody to try to sign up today?
You can sign up today, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody that wants to look at the board over there and sign up, please do so. So. Anyway, thanks for being here.
All right.